is a hidden seed of strength. Join Portia Booker on The Grief Grantor as we journey through stories of resilience, finding gratitude in the echoes of grief. Together, we transform sorrow into strength, pain into purpose. Welcome to The Grief Grantor, where your healing journey begins.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Grief Grantor. I am your host, Portia Booker, also known as your grief awareness advocate. And today we're going to talk about Children's Grief Awareness Month. So those of you who don't know, Children's Grief Awareness Month focuses on the grief and the support that children need as they're embarking on their grief journey, right? We tend to not really think about maybe the emotions that kids are going through, whatever type of grief they're experiencing, right? But we tend to focus solely on when a child experiences the loss of someone, i.e. a parent, maybe a sibling. But I want to share a little quick story with all of you guys. So I had the opportunity to be raised by my great grandmother. And if she was still around, she would have been 108 years old this month, November. And one of the things that I often think about is how I was able to cultivate so many rich memories with my great grandmother, because obviously my mother had to work, and that whole thing. But one of the things that I want to really focus on with my memories with my great grandmother is how there was a rich relationship and bond that I was able to cultivate with her, even though, yeah, my mom was still around in that whole thing. But think about how, as each and every one of us embarks on our journey in our lifetime, those of us who are maybe parents, right? And maybe we didn't have that type of bond or relationship with our parent, but we were able to cultivate a relationship with either a grandparent or another trusted adult, maybe an aunt, maybe an uncle. And so I really want to just focus on and remind everybody that even though we may not always have the best relationship with our parent or something that we really want, right? There's always that one person in our lifetime that is able to give us that level of love and support and to always keep us uplifted and inspired, right? Like my great grandmother, she had a way with words. Like seriously, she had a way with words. One of her quotes that I always remember to this day is "May wonders never cease." And she got that from the book The Game of Life by Florence Scovel Shinn. And I didn't realize that that's where she got it from until years later after she transitioned. But when I hear that quote now, it makes me think about being in the present moment, right? When we embark on our grief journey, sometimes it's hard for us to really see the beauty that still exists in our life, right? We still have miracles that happen. We still have beautiful moments that still cultivate within our lifetime. It may not necessarily be with the people who we are born into this world with, but we're still able to find those wonders, those mysteries, and embark on that childlike energy, right? That curiosity, right? So I think just to remind everybody today, we're all children of someone, right? I know Children's Grief Awareness Month really focuses on children as in younger children, but each and every one of us, there's still that child in each and every one of us that's still grieving something. So I want to really leave this word with all of you today is as you're embarking on your grief journey, whatever age you might be, remember to always nurture and support that little girl, that little boy within you, because there's always a need, there's always a way to still incorporate some level of happiness, some level of laughter, and find the many miracles and the many wonders that exist in this world. So, we're going to take a quick break right here on the Grief Grantor. When we come back, we will be joined by our resident guest, Miss Laura Brennan Ballet, who is the author of The Science of Empowerment. And we're going to dive more into Children's Grief Awareness Month and how parents can create a rich relationship with their children as they're possibly on their own grief journey. So we will be right back here on the Grief Grantor. Stay tuned. All right, everybody, welcome back right here on the Grief Grantor. Before we took our break, I really talked about just the importance of finding that level of support and also honoring Grief Awareness Month for children. Because each and every one of us is a child of somebody, each and every one of us has lost someone at a different age. And we need still that level of support, that level of love, and finding gratitude in the support circle that we currently have. So, as I mentioned, we are joined today by our resident guest, Miss Laura Brennan Ballet. And we're going to really focus on how parents can cultivate a different level of appreciation and also creating more bonds with their kids even as they're on their own grief journey. So without further delay, let me welcome to the stage Miss Laura Brennan Ballet. Hello, Laura. How you doing?
Oh, Portia, I love your energy. Even when we're speaking of grief and transition, which is such a heartfelt human, right, shared experience. This is really modeling the energy around empowering our grief journey. And yes, we have moments of just, deep sorrow and sadness, and we hang under those covers for lots of moments. But it's so important to bring the joy of life as we continue when someone made the transition. So thank you. Gratitude, as always, for being a part of this human experience with you and sharing time and this beautiful community that you are creating around such an important topic. And I have a few things to say, bounced off of what you are expressing. And something that came to my heart is, as adults, when we are going through the transition and we have children to nurture and support while they're going through it, I loved this almost visual of allowing ourselves to tap into our inner child in order to meet our actual children where they are. And whether it's a child at 5 years old or 12 or even 22, to allow ourselves as the adult going into that beautiful, sometimes very vulnerable place of grief, so we can meet our children and start to create this journey of healing together. It's almost if, as an adult, if we don't quite know how to do it, because let's say we did not have anyone to support us at all, now through our children's eyes, through their emotions and through their grief, we can now heal something within ourselves, which I think sets such a beautiful example in real time of how to model and empower the grief process.
I couldn't agree more, Laura. I mean, I think we tend to sometimes, again, I've said this many times, we kind of diminish our
Mhm.
grief, right? And sometimes we forget that we were once children, right?
Yeah.
We still have that little boy or that little girl that's still needing that love, that support, because grief is an ever evolving journey. There's no quote unquote endpoint to grief. I've mentioned this several times that we tend to want to put a mathematical equation on our grief.
Yeah.
2 plus 2 always equals 4. Well, with grief, it kind of reminds me of an algebraic expression, right? You're going to change different variables
Mhm.
depending on what level of your life that you're at, what age, what experience. So I think we need to sometimes have that reminder that that little kid within us is still grieving, right? And I think when and I can speak for myself, right, of, having both my parents transition, right, 9 months within each other,
Mhm.
that little girl within me is like, where's mommy and daddy? Kind of like when you watch the cartoons and you see the little kid that gets, like separated from
Yeah.
everybody and they're kind of like walking down the little dark alley crying type of thing. Each and every one of us has experienced that at
Yeah.
some point in our life. And it's not necessarily from the physical transition of somebody,
Right.
right? And, Laura, I really want to touch on today with you being a parent. I was thinking about this the other day, how, and brought this up in the opening about my relationship that I had with my great grandmother,
Mm.
who would have been 108 this year. And when I think about the relationship that I had with her, there were some parts that she knew about me that my mom didn't.
Yeah.
And so, Laura, I'm curious for our audience, how can parents find gratitude, number one, in knowing that their children can have this rich bond with their parents, even though their upbringing was a little different?
Yeah. Again, I think this is such a beautiful example of showing up for oneself. And when we really don't have the skill set or the experience through the pathway of our children, how it almost, I'm going to use the word, forces us to show up differently. And that, mentally and emotionally to be able to take accountability that I didn't have anyone when I went through this, but my child does have that now. And that is what is important. And look at that ancestry and that legacy. So as a daughter, if I didn't have, say, the most fulfilling relationship with my mother, but my daughter has that with her grandmother, finding the grace and the divinity, that gratitude of just feeling your heart being filled, knowing that, okay, I didn't, but she does. And that's so important. And that may also open up a conversation for me to have with, let's just say, my mother in this example. I notice, Mom, that you really have this beautiful, nurturing, just way of being with my daughter. And I so needed and miss that with you. How can you and I create something now that really matters? And it would be different from the childhood perspective, but that energetic healing and that conversation is so important. And then now you have this beautiful legacy of the three women or the three men, or however it falls into place with the family. But there's such opportunity to heal through grief. And when people around us transition, there is real opportunity to heal. And again, when we say this word, empower the grief process, this is how we do it. This is how we do it.
Laura, I want to kind of touch more on this, right? Because I know there's some parents who fall out of this, I can say, this simplified
Yeah.
conversation healing algorithm,
Yeah.
right? And so I'm curious for you to maybe elaborate on how can parents who maybe they've exhausted all efforts, right, to cultivate this healing or level of, I guess you can say, inclusivity with their parent, even though their kids can still have a relationship with grandma and grandpa, but they can't. How can these parents maybe find empowerment knowing that they've done all that they can, but also not hold on to any level of resentment or guilt?
Mhm. Again, this is the beauty of being an adult. We learn to not suppress or put aside our own needs of healing, but to look at it from the perspective of the child and what is so beautiful that's happening now. And to not have anger or resentment and sadness and even grief while a parent, let's say, is alive and they seem to be giving more to the child. If we're looking at it from the perspective of our own children's needs, to have that bond with a living person, so that when that person does transition, their experience is more elevated than ours was. Again, I think this is the beauty of living an elevated and empowered life. Sometimes we need to create peace with what was so we can open up a new pathway for what can be. So we may not be able to go directly to that source and heal every moment of grief or resentment or anger even. But when we look at our children and we see that they are having something more or deeper than we did, isn't that one of the whole main purposes of creating life, so that we get to elevate and empower their experience past what we went through? That's how I would look at it.
And I like that, Laura, because you're able to, number one, appreciate that, yeah, even though I'm not able to have this rich relationship with my parent, at least my kids can. It's still, there's still a bond at some, in some interval, right? And then the other thing too is, again, it goes back to gratitude, right? Finding that gratitude in being able to see this, right? Because think about how so many people, like for me, I met so many people throughout my journey who never even knew their grandparents, who never, they've heard stories, maybe they've seen pictures, but I've had the opportunity to be raised by my great grandmother. And what a gift it is for me. And I know, based on what my family has shared with me, Laura, my great grandmother was, let's just say, Hades on wheels, to put it lightly. And,
Love it.
when I think about how my mom described her in comparison to my experience, I'm like, oh, Mom, are you sure? But I know that obviously experience is different. But I'm grateful that I was able to be around her and learn so much about the world, so much about life. And, Laura, I want to ask you this for our audience who is tuning in. Maybe what's one question that parents can ask themselves when they're in this boat of obviously feeling a little bit of defeat, feeling as though they're not able to, in a sense, heal or cure the damage that's been done? What's maybe one question they can ask themselves in these situations to, number one, give themselves a level of gratitude for what is present. Number two, maybe even cultivate a sense of insight into who they are. And also, number three, maybe even find a level of empowerment, knowing that there's healing going on, even though it's not directly from them.
Yeah, and that's so beautiful how you just really asked that question. We, as human beings, we tend not to get everything we need, right? It's built into the human condition. I believe it's built in so that we can evolve and empower. If we came into this world with everything at our fingertips, the the joy and the robust exploration into our individual self would be non-existent. I think if we're asking ourselves as an adult, I feel slighted. My child's getting something that I'm not, and it's bringing something up in me. Through the eyes of gratitude, and let's hope some awakening or accountability into the awareness of it's stirring up emotions in me. But as the parent, the gratitude that my child does have this, as we've been saying, is so important. Think about being a parent that actually is witnessing the breaking of a negative pattern within the family dynamic. So, and we're using like a woman and a daughter. So my mom and I did not have the best of relationship, but my mother and my daughter are having a beautiful relationship. I am witnessed to this. I am seeing this happen. There is something that naturally is occurring. And rather than hold negative energy and thought and sensation in the body against this, let's use this as a way to begin the healing process. And one of the things that I would suggest is maybe for that mother and daughter, not the grandmother, the mother and the daughter, to begin to create something of their unique bond that mom didn't necessarily have. So one of the questions I would ask as the adult, what do I need in this moment to reassure myself that the bond I'm creating with my daughter is different than the one maybe I did not experience with my own mother. And how can I empower myself by watching my mother, who maybe is once removed from the patterns that she could not heal while she was raising me, but now through her granddaughter, there is space. And those issues and those hardships are not so upfront, that this natural, heartfelt experience is happening. And so I may not be able to go directly to my mom and heal, but I can begin to create this dynamics with my daughter so that she now has what I didn't. And what better way to empower not only myself, but my child, and letting her know that just because something wasn't in place before, it now can be through effort, through heart, through gratitude. And so I think it's really important to see ourselves in a more the power seat of choice, right? I talk about this all the time. And as that adult, I am in the power seat of choice. And rather than hold the energetic frequency of what I didn't have with my own mother, first and foremost, the gratitude of what my daughter is experiencing. And now I have this position to deepen my own relationship with her. Or vice versa. There could be an adult child whose parent doesn't have the skill set or the ability to reach back out to that adult child in the time of losing his wife or her husband. But now the child could reach out to that parent and stand up differently and show compassion and say, I understand that it's difficult for you to reach back out to me. Let me reach out to you, and create a moment and a bonding that may not fill in that gap all the way, but was a touch point of connection that mattered to the child, adult child, now living after the transition. And I am thinking about even with your father and you at that personal point of story.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Laura, and thank you for reiterating that, because that's exactly what happened. I made the choice to make it right.
Yeah.
I didn't want to have that guilt, that resentment, that woulda, coulda, shoulda.
Yeah.
Right. I knew there was just something in me. It's like, you know what? Let me be the bigger person. Let me ask myself, what do I need in this moment? I wanted some form of closure, and I didn't want my closure to resemble like so many other people who didn't take that step because maybe they were too afraid. Maybe they've exhausted all efforts. But like one of my favorite phrases goes is there's always another chance, right? It's the chance that the other chance that we don't take is where the miracle doesn't appear, but it just takes one more try. And when you believe it in your heart, you never know how the doors will open for you to give you that opening. So we're going to take another quick break right here on the Grief Grantor, everybody. When we come back, we've got a very, very special topic that we're going to cover. All right, we'll be right back.
Are you a change agent? You're going to love the Superpowers for Good show. I'm Devin Thorpe. Every Tuesday and Thursday morning at 11 Eastern, I host an inspiring changemaker on Achieve TV. Join us right here on E360 TV.
All right, everybody, welcome back right here on the Grief Grantor. We are joined by our special guest, Miss Laura Brennan Ballet, and we were just having a great conversation about how parents can, number one, find empowerment, knowing that even though they may have not have had that rich relationship with their parent, but if they do have children, how their children are able to cultivate a bond with their parent, and also with them being able to find gratitude and knowing that there's some level of healing taking place. Laura, I thought about this, and one of the things that I'm always curious about is, number one, I've had several parents tell me that they don't allow their kids to let them see them cry, right? And I'm curious for you, as someone who has children, has daughters yet alone, right? I think there's a lot of mothers who there's a lot of maybe shame and guilt around showing emotion, right? How do you think allowing your children to be a part of your grief journey can bring a level of not only harmony, but also strength to the relationship?
Yeah, this is an empowering question to ask, and it's so important. And I mean, even if we are not just looking at the grief around transition and the importance of that, just to life itself, if we become ill, if we're just run down, so many women understand what it's like to get burnt out. To show our children how important it is to tap into our own emotional acuity, for me, is one of the most empowering models that we can represent in this human condition. My girls full on know I am an emotional being. I do believe that there are indicators or markers or regulators to emotionality. So every day I wouldn't just fly off the handle and, you're not running around screaming, or you're not crying at the drop of a hat, etc. But they do know that when something comes in and has an effect on my mom and even dad, or a partnership, however our beautiful blended families look now, it is so important to let them know the body needs to release. It could be screaming into a pillow. It could be going to a boxing class. It could be going to the local community center and going in and listening to the singing bowls. It does not matter. They need to know that there are options and opportunities and, just a plethora of skills and tools and books and education that allow a space to release whatever it is we're feeling. And both of my kids have seen me down to my knees, and they've seen me flying to the heavens and everywhere in between. And I let them know, right now, this is what I'm going through. This is how I'm expressing it. Give me my space. We will reconnect, and you can ask me questions and you can share your thoughts. I've taught them to go in and journal. So if I can't be there right in that moment because I personally am going through something, please go pick up a pen and paper and release what you are feeling, what you are seeing. What is it creating in you? So we may have a conversation around this when I can be fully present. And I started this when they were very young. And again, not everything we do as the adult in the room is the right way to do it. But I do believe it's so important to acknowledge the moment, the real time moment of what we're going through, and letting our child know, I am here for you. I just can't fully be present. Give me a moment and let me have my space, and I will then embrace what you need. And I have found that not only gives them that real experience of, oh, my mom needs something in this moment. Let me give that to her, because she also created the safety of knowing that she will be there for me in a relatively, you know, kind of short time frame. So I'm not leaving them out and hanging over there, and they know they're not being ignored or left. They understand that it is okay to cry, to kick, to scream, to be happy, to be sad, to be negative, to be positive, and own that experience. And also be aware, as a parent, I'm here for you. Just give me a moment. And I think it's not, I think I know, because both my girls are growing now into young women. And we talk about this. And I go through this with them weekly as they are developing, right, their autonomy in the world, and these conversations that we have, and letting them know it's okay. It's okay. We will find our way through it. And I think that maybe is an add in here to any of the parents, or even just the guardians of children, foster care, grandparents, aunts, uncles, leadership, to just remind the younger people going through these experiences I've got you. I may not know exactly how to have you have your back and cover all grounds. Just give me a moment to catch my breath, and I will show up to my very best ability. And this absolutely teaches them what that regulation system can look like. And it's ever going. There's no end to it. I just talked to my 19-year-old about this, and she was going through something. And I said, you will go through this till you take your last breath. How we choose to show up within the experience, that's what's going to kind of give directive to how your life unfolds.
Laura, as always, whenever we have conversations, I'm like taking notes like a sponge. I feel like I have to have like multiple sponges to soak up what you're saying, and one of the things that you just mentioned about giving your kids a directive and, an action step instead of just get out of my face. Hey, go journal about what you're feeling based on what you're seeing and how I'm choosing to deal with this situation, whatever it might be. Laura, I'm curious for the guardians, the parents, whoever it is who takes ownership of a younger person or children, right? I know in our society, there tends to be this discrepancy when it comes to vulnerability, when it comes to what vulnerability means. Should you say this? Is this too much? Is this too little? I'm curious how parents, guardians, whoever they identify as, how they can find strength to be vulnerable in these moments, to let their kids know that they're going through something and not feel a sense of shame when they're doing that.
One of the ideas around this, whether we're looking at behavioral psychology or we're studying, kind of the laws and principles of negative and positive energy, I find, and this may sound a bit counterproductive, but to create levity, joy, fun, meaning even if I'm struggling with something and I am even the slightest bit aware that the person I'm responsible for in that moment, so if it's a direct, child, or we said if you're a guardian, a foster parent, or you're stepping in as a grandparent or an aunt, however that may look, I find it's very important when we're up against dealing with grief, and however that may be playing out through the death of a family member, a pet, or a friend, or a large public, event that happens. I think it is important to step outside and go for a walk, go for a hike, put your feet in the sand. There's a possible opportunity to, if there's a mother and a daughter, maybe, or even a father and a son, go to a craft store and pick things out and begin to put maybe an album or a scrapbook together. You can sit, and technology is a big thing now, as a parent and a child or a guardian and a child, go onto the internet and pull out and print out images that express maybe what they can't verbalize, but quietly put some soft, maybe healing music on and say, it's okay. Let's open up our laptop and let's search for images and print them out. We don't have to talk about it right now, but let's begin to create maybe a collage, or even I'll use the word like an expressive board rather than a visual board. And they can start to see what's going on. This then we can talk about maybe later on in the day, or maybe we can say, okay, maybe you want to work on this, and this weekend you and I will make some hot cocoa and marshmallows, and let's look at your expressive board and let's talk about these things. There's so many ways. Again, moms and daughters with jewelry and beads, you can create memory bracelets. Playing with clay as adults and as children is so important. And this is such a way to bring back the joy of life, the gratitude of life. And it also helps softens some of those memories. So we remember, oh, that person loved their dog. And so you're playing with clay and you make a little dog and you remember the name. There's ways to bring in celebrating the life of who we're grieving, even if it could be a friend whose best friend moved away. I talked to my kids when everyone started going to college and university and how that changed the dynamics of their relationship. There was actually grief and sadness over where they used to play in the yard for 10 years growing up. They're gone now, and they're starting to, develop their own lives, and the importance of reaching out and staying in touch through a text or an email. And when you do come back in town to your parents' house, to get together and go for an acai bowl or go to the mall and go shopping. All of these things have such great impact on the health and the well-being of how we all move through it. And when we really do give that pathway to our children, we then realize we need to give that to ourselves. And this is really how the empowerment of awareness to energy really comes into play.
Laura, of course, like a flood of ideas comes to my brain, every time we have these conversations, because you're right. Like, we need to, number one, build our self-awareness all the time. And I think grief really helps us to do that. I mean, I can speak from my own journey. Number one, when my mom made her transition and me being open to still some form of communication with her, right? Like, I shared with you 2 days after her transition, the monarch butterfly that was, flying in the front yard. Well, a couple months ago, Laura, my mom's phone is still on. Like, I haven't been able to cut it off just yet, but still, it's a process, it's a journey, right?
Yeah.
Well, one of the last pictures that I took on her phone, like a couple days before she got admitted into the hospital, was of a yellow swallowtail butterfly. And when I think back to over this past summer, all the swallowtails that I saw, the yellow ones, the black ones, the monarchs, I said, wow, like, who would have thought to put two and two together? That because I was open, again, I made the choice to be open to some form of message, some form of a sign from her, that this is what I would get. But again, it goes back to choice, right? Choosing. And I share it all the time on my social media about the butterflies that I see, the hawk feathers that I find,
Right.
and, not feeling as though I'm the only one who's experiencing these level of connectivity, in a sense.
And I'm so sorry. And if I
No.
may, just for parents that are listening, think of the creative energy that you can bestow upon your child, let's say with whatever the transition experience is, to get creative. Like, what would it be like, say, to John, say John's the child. What would it be like, John, if you looked for a feather and it had a specific marking, and that was maybe a feather from your grandfather? Like, to find a way to expand the mindset around how we go through grief. There's such creative ways. And as an adult, we can understand maybe being open to ancient teachings and tribal rituals and all of these amazing things where maybe the younger generations aren't as exposed, but then find a way to adapt to what might allow them to feel closer in that process, and really understand that, as you said, being open and willing to look at energy, knowing that it doesn't die, the physicality does, but the soul, the spirit, however your faith lies, there is something in the power of that afterworld that we might be able to tap into. And certainly expressing this to our child may bring a level of creativity that could change their lives forever in a positive and empowering way.
Laura, I want to touch on that really fast, because when you talk about how the energy stays present, I'm going to give a very good example of this. So last year, I had the opportunity to meet our mutual connection, Dawn, in person, right? And this was the first time that I traveled without my mom, calling her. I always called my mom, like, hey, mom, made it to this destination. I'm at the airport. I'm about to go eat, whatever. This was the first time I traveled without having her physical presence here to let her know I made it safely. We'll talk about the energy, right? The fact that I still had that love energy for my mom the entire trip, Laura, from here in Cleveland to St. Louis, then from St. Louis to Chicago to back here in Cleveland. God put a mom next to me every time I stepped on the plane. I mean, and we would just talk about life. They heard about my story. They heard about what I was doing. And that's how I knew right then and there that that love energy that I have for my mom is still very present. Hence why I continue to attract that same level of my mom's love through other people. And it's astounding to me sometimes, like, man, it's really that powerful. But again, when I think about how I've built on my self-awareness through my grief journey and being open to receiving it, that's how I'm able to really talk about it. Because to me, it's no coincidence at all. It definitely is my mom letting me know, Portia, I'm still around. I'm still around. So I think, to go back to what you mentioned about that energetic connectivity, just being open to receiving it and being open to how it will come about. It won't always come about the way that we envision it, right? It's not going to be this physical, like, feather that says, hey, Laura, this is,
Hi, it's mom. I'm floating around in a feather. No.
Right. And sometimes it will resemble some form of it. Like, a few times, funny story, I took myself to lunch a couple weeks ago, and the server who I had, my mom's name was Sharon. The server who I had, her name was Charisse, but it was spelled Shar, which is how my mom's first name was spelled. I'm like, okay, all right. And she, like, her sense of humor was like my mom. She was so sweet. I think we were around the same age, but she had an old soul. I could tell she did, but it was just like, what in the world? So it's amazing sometimes when we're open to it, how it will come to us directly and being open.
And also speaking, let's just say, from a neuroscience and a neuroenergy perspective, about how we really do have the ability to create new neuronal pathways in the brain. So just think about wires and how they're forming, and they can crisscross and get knotted and get stuck, i.e. negative energy, negative thought, negative mindset. When we allow ourselves to begin to open up to new ideas and just expand our heart energy and look for the miracles, look for the faith, the divinity, look for the creation, whatever word you want to put to it. This is what allows us to now start to connect new neuronal pathways in the brain. Now we can start recalibrating that negative energy, that grief, that sadness, anger, resentment, because we're now getting creative. And we are creative beings. We're starting to say to the universe, to God, I am open for a sign. I believe in it. I don't need to see it. I'm going to believe that the presence of that person is still around. There's a residue, there's an imprint of them all around this earth. Let me be open to it. And again, everyone has a different lexicon, a different language of how they express and feel and explore. Just do something to tap in to a more neutral to positive state of energy, and know that you are worthy of pulling in these beautiful expressions of people that have transitioned. And don't expect a specific, just be open and see what enters in.
100%. Laura, I think you just hit the nail on the head. Just being open.
Yeah.
Right. I think when we're in seasons of grief, we close down because we're so fixated on the loss. But as I've always said it, when you invite gratitude into your life and apply that to everything, every quote unquote bad experience, every in between, there truly is a gain in every situation.
There is.
So we're going to take another quick break right here on the Grief Grantor, everybody. When we come back, we're going to be wrapping up. We got a very, very good word of wisdom from our special guest, Miss Laura Brennan Ballet. So we'll be right back.
Hi there, I'm Dawn Livingston, your host on the Transcend and Succeed show. Join me Fridays at 2 p.m. Central for limitless inspiration and ways to help you transcend your limitations. Tune into the Achieve TV network and the Voyage to Vitality channel. Transcend and Succeed show, right here on A360 TV.
All right, everybody, welcome back right here on the Grief Grantor. Of course, Laura, you always just give us so many words of empowerment, inspiration. Before we jump into the last part of the show, Laura, if our audience again wants to connect with you and learn more about your work, can you please share your website or social media handle with us?
Yes, and thank you again. I think that's just such a lovely opportunity. So just gratitude for you, my friend, above and beyond what we do here for the community. www.thescienceofempowerment.com. There's an area in there you can email me, of course, coaching, speaking engagements, and please order the book on Amazon, The Science of Empowerment. It will absolutely support and empower and elevate all your experiences.
Excellent, excellent. So those of you who want to connect with Laura, you can find her. Literally, you can probably just Google you too, Laura. I think I've Googled you before I even
Find me
before-
through Portia and the Grief Grantor.
Yes, you could. Laura is our resident guest on the show, so she will be on monthly to deliver us words of empowerment on various aspects of grief. And Laura, first and foremost, this conversation was definitely powerful, because I love having these conversations, especially because through my grief journey, I've learned to find gratitude. I've learned to, number one, build resilience and also be innovative with how I share my grief journey, right? Like, I've been very open from the beginning, from both my parents' transitions, about the emotions that I've been feeling, right? The joyous moments along with some of the heart-wrenching ones, right? And also through it, I've learned to cultivate forgiveness, right? Forgiving my dad for being absent throughout majority of my life, but his absence taught me to be present for every moment of my life.
Yeah.
And Laura, for our audience, I know we touched on obviously Children's Grief Awareness Month, and each and every one of us as an adult, there's that inner child within us, right? That's grieving something, whether it's that relationship with the parent that we could not create, right? And I'm curious, Laura, for our audience, how can they embark on what I call a forgiveness cleanse, where they can start with themselves and then expand it out in a more empowering way?
Yeah, for me, let's say I was coaching someone on this exact question, I would simply ask, what is the holding on to not forgiving? How is that serving you? And in the answering of that question, we start to understand that it really is our own forgiveness. It is a journey that we need to take. And you said something so beautiful. Had you not forgiven your father's absence, you would have not gone through that authentic journey of being present. Had you looked at him for him to give you the feeling and the experience of forgiveness, it never would have empowered you. It would have been words, and it would have been his thought process, and it never would have quite landed the same way. When we venture into, and I use this word a lot, but I want everyone to hear it in the most gentle and appreciative of ways. When we move into recalibrating forgiveness, recalibrating anger, whatever word may be there, this automatically positions us in the power seat of choice. Do I want to hold on to the energetic construct of not forgiving, or do I want to expand and open up into what forgiveness can look like for me, my own choosing? How do I want to feel about forgiving that person, that experience? This absolutely empowers you. You now are exercising almost, you're authorizing what this can mean to you. And that just naturally empowers you. And I'm not saying it is important to connect sometimes through a conversation, through a letter, but even something that parents can do and we can do as that child ourselves. Let's say we did lose a parent that we never were able to connect with. This is where writing a letter and speaking as if we really are expressing what we need from them and trusting and having faith that the universe is carrying that energy out into that person. And this is again where we empower our own journey. We release that letter. We trust that it has found its place. And now we release ourselves from that holding pattern of not forgiving. So it really is this beautiful kind of circled experience. And it starts with us and it finishes with us.
I couldn't agree more, Laura. I mean, because forgiveness is for you, right? I
Yeah.
think we tend to fall into this boat that forgiveness is for the other person, but no, it's for you. And it took me a minute to really understand that. And once I went through it myself,
Mhm.
I literally kind of asked myself the question now, what's the hurt? What
Yeah.
really is the hurt when there's so much that I've learned through the experience, right? Because I mean, I'll be honest, me and my father, we were not on the same page for a long time. But when I saw that he was reaching that point of his health doing this, and he had Alzheimer's dementia, he didn't really remember who he was, all the great achievements he had in his life, it made me take a minute to say, you know what? How can I hold this man, this person accountable for something that they don't even remember anymore?
Yeah.
How can I hold this much unforgiveness to this person who did all they could, right? They showed up in the world the way that they were taught,
Right.
right? And I'm going to be the better person. I'm going to be the bigger person and go about this differently than what most people will do. I always say the extra mile is never crowded. It
Yeah, it
never, ever
isn't.
is crowded. And I said, you know what? Portia's going to go the extra mile here. I want to clear my slate. I don't want to have any ounce of guilt, any ounce of resentment. And the same thing with my mom, right? Like when my mom was really, her health was doing this very quickly. And I had to make a choice. I said, you only get one mom in this world.
Yeah.
And I'd rather spend my time giving her the most happiest moments, whatever they might be. And that's exactly what I got, Laura. I got a year
Yeah.
with my mom before
Yeah.
she transitioned. Even though it was hard, it was definitely a painful thing, but at the same time, it gave me my purpose.
Yeah. And so many of us don't have the opportunity to maybe speak or heal. There's people that are estranged for decades and find out that their parent or their sibling or someone passed away and they never really quite connected. And that in and of itself is a very unique self-forgiving journey. That's why I always ask people, is there a point that you've done all that you can and you have some level of comfort? So if that person were to transition, you're at peace with it. And that's what's important. And I think that's an important question to ask. And again, wrapping this around this circle, this kind of encompassed circle around childhood or young adult grief, when people are transitioning, is to just make sure you're thinking about the care and consideration of that person that's younger than us, that we are doing the best we can, but we also have the ability to think differently than we are actually doing and trying to find that space for their well-being. And that's so important for them because they don't have the decades of experience that we have. And what we do in that moment really, again, has direct causation and directive on how they will handle relationships and healing, what grief looks like for them, and learning how to be more comfortable with that process.
Couldn't have said it better, Laura. I mean, we have the ability, it goes back to choice, right? The seed of choice,
Yeah.
right? If we choose to show up in a different way, better than the way our parents or however we were taught, then it continued to fester that level of healing, that level of empowerment, that level of innovation, that level of gratitude in
Yeah.
order to make the next generation better. You know, there's a little girl who I'm definitely a big fan of her. She's in a unique situation, to say the least. I don't want to go too much into detail, but if I could, I'd adopt her. I definitely would adopt her. And, you know, one of the things that I always talk to one of my soul mothers about is I just pray that she cultivates an attitude of gratitude despite the situation that she's in, because I know that she's a very lovable kid. But I also pray that even if our paths, right now are not crossing, I pray that she crosses my path again.
Yeah.
Because I want to, continue to show her that there's still love and light and goodness in the world, despite what you've been through in your life. What you've been through doesn't have to be your endpoint.
Right. Absolutely not. And we all know that when we are faced with adversity, whatever that may be, it really does come down to someone holding your hand, someone touching your face, someone putting their arms around you. It is that beautiful, that profound, and that empowering at the very base level of our humanness.
100%. 100%. That when we're going through grief, no matter what, that support system is key. And also giving yourself permission to be open to whatever that support is going to look like.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, everybody, that was our resident guest, Miss Laura Brennan Ballet, that you heard from on the Grief Grantor. And that concludes another episode of this show. Thanks for tuning in. And until next time, everybody.
Thank you for joining us on the Grief Grantor. May the story shared today light your path and guide your heart toward healing. Remember, with every moment of grief, there's an opportunity for gratitude, resilience, and empowerment. Continue your journey with us online and share your own story, because in this tapestry of life, every thread matters, especially yours.